You know that feeling when your brain just won't shut off?
Oh, yeah.
Like there's a constant browser window open with, I don't know, a million tabs, all flashing urgent notifications.
Definitely. We actually heard from a listener who described it just like that.
Right. This relentless mental chatter just leaving them completely drained. If that sounds familiar, well, you're in exactly the right place today.
Because that feeling, being overwhelmed by your own thoughts, what if the root of that wasn't all the external stuff life throws at you?
What if it was closer?
Yeah, something much closer, like the way we actually engage with our own minds. That's the territory we're exploring in this deep dive, drawing from the ideas in Joseph Nguyen's book, Don't Believe Everything You Think.
Exactly. In Nguyen's book, it sort of offers a path towards more peace, love, and joy by helping us understand the nuts and bolts of how our minds operate.
Right.
He shares his own journey searching for answers, and it's interesting. He acknowledges the influence of Sydney Banks, Joe Bailey, Michael Neal.
Key figures, yeah. In the understanding known as the three principles.
So for you, the listener, maybe grappling with that mental overwhelm, our aim today is to extract some truly, potentially game-changing insights from this book.
We want to offer a fresh perspective on your own thinking patterns, not as something you need to wrestle into submission with, like willpower.
Yo, note that.
But as something to understand at a deeper level. This shift in understanding, we think, could be the key to unlocking more inner peace and less of that draining mental noise.
Okay, so let's get into it. This journey to really pinpoint what causes us to suffer. Nguyen starts by highlighting a really crucial difference.
Yeah, the one between pain and suffering.
It's almost like that old saying, the Buddhist idea of the two arrows.
Precisely. The first arrow, that's the unavoidable pain of being human, right? Difficult events, physical discomfort, loss. Life brings those things.
Sure, unavoidable.
But that second arrow, the one that sticks with us, causing prolonged agony, that's our reaction to the first arrow. Our emotional, our psychological suffering.
And the powerful idea here is that this second arrow, it's optional.
That's the core idea. It's optional.
Right. And if you're anything like I used to be, or like our listener maybe, you might be thinking, okay, easy to say.
Right.
How do you just not react? I mean, Nguyen himself went through years of searching, right? Self-help books, therapy, all sorts of practices.
Looking for that magic switch.
Yeah, hoping to find that switch to just turn off suffering.
And as he recounts in the book, while those efforts, they might have offered some temporary relief.
Sometimes they do.
Yeah, but they didn't hit the core issue. It wasn't until he shifted his focus from trying to fix his problems to understanding the fundamental way our minds create our experience that he found a more profound answer.
Yeah. Which brings us to what Nguyen argues is the central point. The root cause of all our suffering is our thinking. Now, I know some of you might immediately kind of bristle at that. Are you saying my problems aren't real?
Right. That's a common reaction.
But that's not really what we're getting at, is it?
Absolutely not. The book is clear that our perception of reality feels very real.
Of course.
And the emotions we experience as a result of our thoughts are absolutely genuine. However, the core insight is that we're living in a world constructed by our thoughts, not in some purely objective reality out there.
Like Sydney Banks put it, thought is not reality, yet it is through thought that our realities are created.
Exactly. That quote nails it.
That example in the book about the coffee shop really illustrated this for me. You could have two people sitting side by side, same place.
Same environment.
But one is caught in this whirlwind of anxiety while the other is just completely present and at ease. Same external situation.
Wildly different internal worlds.
It really highlights how our thinking shapes our experience, doesn't it?
It really does. And the author extends this to something like our opinions about, say, a public figure.
Oh, yeah.
You ask 100 people, you'll likely get 100 different takes, even though they're all observing the same individual. The meaning we attach to an event, the story we tell ourselves about it, that's what dictates our emotional response.
Sure.
So it's not the event itself.
It's the thinking about it.
It's our thinking about it that creates our feelings.
Yes. And this connects to that idea of like hating your job while you're actually at home. You could be physically miles away from the stressful office, maybe even spending quality time with loved ones.
Yeah, on the sofa.
But if your mind is still replaying work frustrations, you're feeling those negative emotions as if you were right back there.
Right there in the thick of it.
It's a powerful reminder that our emotional state is tied to our thoughts, not just our immediate surroundings.
That perfectly demonstrates it. Our feelings aren't a direct consequence of external circumstances, but a result of our thinking about those circumstances.
Okay.
The book then poses a really compelling thought experiment. Who would you be without that thought?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. Take a moment right now, maybe. Think about that nagging worry, that persistent frustration. Imagine it just vanished. What would be left?
And the book suggests that what would be left is likely a feeling of being happier, more peaceful.
Lighter, freer.
Lighter, yeah, more free. It really points to the idea that our natural sort of default state, when our minds aren't busy with specific thoughts, is actually one of well-being.
It does. And to further illustrate this fundamental point that our reactions, our thinking, cause our suffering, the book shares that wonderful Zen story.
The young monk in the empty boat.
That's the one. This monk was getting really agitated by noises during his meditation, so he went to a lake seeking solitude.
Yeah, and he rows out to the middle of the lake thinking, okay, finally peace.
Finally.
But then another boat bumps into his, and he's immediately filled with anger.
Instantly furious.
Until he realizes it's completely empty. It wasn't another person, it was just an empty vessel drifting.
And what's so insightful there is that the empty boat represents those neutral external events we encounter, right?
Right.
It wasn't the boat itself that triggered the monk's anger, but his interpretation of it, his thinking about the situation.
Like the elder monk asks him later.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the external disturbances, but our internal response, our thinking, that truly creates our suffering.
Okay, so if our thinking is the main culprit here, why do we even do it so much? I mean, it seems a bit counterproductive if it's leading to all this mental noise and suffering our listener described.
Well, the book explains that our ability to think, to analyze and anticipate, it evolved as a crucial survival mechanism.
Right, evolutionary.
Our minds are incredibly skilled at scanning our environment for potential dangers, even drawing on past experiences to predict future threats. Think of it as a built-in alarm system.
Designed to keep us safe.
Exactly.
So it's like our brains are constantly on alert, designed to protect us in a world that, historically was much more dangerous than today, usually.
Precisely. The challenge in our modern lives is that this survival-oriented thinking can become overactive. The mind's primary focus remains survival.
Still wired that way.
But our deeper selves, our consciousness, often yearn for fulfillment and joy. If we're constantly operating from that survival-driven thinking part of our brain, we can get stuck.
Stuck in fight or flight.
Yeah, stuck in a perpetual state of fight or flight, leading to those negative emotions and that feeling of being overwhelmed we talked about earlier.
That makes sense. It's like our ancient hardware trying to run modern software, and sometimes there's a real mismatch.
Good analogy.
Now, the book also draws a really important distinction between thoughts and thinking, which I found particularly helpful. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. Thoughts, according to Nguyen, are the raw mental material. They just arise spontaneously, seemingly from nowhere.
Like pop-ups.
Yeah, the book even suggests the universe as a potential source. Thoughts are effortless. They're just there, like clouds passing in the sky. There's something we have.
So those random ideas or images that just pop into your head out of the blue, that's a thought.
Precisely. Thinking, on the other hand, is our active engagement with those thoughts. It's what we do when we start analyzing, judging, elaborating on those initial thoughts.
Ah, the doing part.
This active process requires effort and intention. We pick up a thought and start turning it over in our minds.
And this is where the trouble often begins, right? The thinking about our thoughts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The book argues that this active thinking, this mental rumination, is the real source of psychological suffering. And get this, positive feelings like peace, love, and joy aren't something we have to generate through positive thinking.
Right.
They are actually our inherent natural state. They emerge when that active thinking quiets down.
The example in the book about asking how much money you want to make really brings this to life. The initial thought of abundance can feel exciting, maybe, but then the thinking kicks in, the self-doubt, the how will I ever achieve that?
Yeah, the obstacles.
And that's when the negativity starts to take hold. The initial thought was just a neutral possibility. It's our subsequent thinking that gives it weight and emotion.
That initial thought is often creative and expansive, while the subsequent thinking tends to become restrictive and self-defeating as we layer on our fears and limiting beliefs.
Right.
The book even includes a helpful thoughts versus thinking chart, outlining these key differences, things like source, universe versus ego, energy, expansive versus restrictive, and the resulting feeling, alive versus stressed.
Okay, so if negative emotions stem from our thinking, then it's kind of a natural leap to assume we need to think positively to feel good.
Sure seems that way.
That whole power of positive thinking idea, where does that fit into this framework?
That's a very common question, and the book directly addresses it.
Mm.
The crucial insight here is that negative emotions arise when we are engaged in active thinking. Positive emotions, on the other hand, are our fundamental default state when we're not actively thinking. We don't need to manufacture them with positive affirmations. They're already there when the mental noise subsides.
That thought experiment about recalling a moment of pure joy
Yeah.
and noticing the absence of active thought at that peak moment was really striking. It suggests that those wonderful feelings aren't produced by thinking. They simply are when the mind is still.
It's like the absence of noise allows the natural music to be heard. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Exactly. The book uses the analogy of a baby. What's a baby's natural disposition before it's conditioned by the world?
Generally pretty content, I guess, unless hungry or tired.
Right. It's generally one of contentment, happiness, and love, not stress and self-consciousness. Our inherent state, according to this perspective, is one of joy, love, and peace.
So active thinking actually pulls us away from that natural state.
That's the idea. It creates the illusion that we need to do something to feel good.
So it's not so much about the content of our thinking, whether it's positive or negative, but the very act of thinking itself that can distance us from our natural well-being.
Yes. That act gives rise to the negative emotions. The more we're caught up in thinking, the more intense those negative feelings can become.
Wow.
Precisely. The book introduces the thought-o-meter analogy. The more our minds are racing with thoughts, regardless of their positive or negative spin, the higher the meter goes.
You push me into the red zone.
Potentially pushing us into that red zone of stress and overwhelm. It's the sheer volume of mental activity, not necessarily just the negative content, that often correlates with those unpleasant feelings.
This is really shifting my perspective. So if our experience is fundamentally created by our thinking, what's the underlying mechanism? This is where the book delves into the three principles, right?
Yes. Sydney Banks is recognized for articulating these three foundational principles that are said to be at the core of the human experience: universal mind, universal consciousness, and universal thought. Understanding these, the book suggests, offers a profound insight into how our inner world is constructed.
Okay, let's try to unpack those. What exactly is universal mind in this context?
Universal mind is described as the fundamental intelligence and life force that permeates everything. Think of it as the energy. Well, the energy that makes an acorn grow into an oak, that governs the cosmos.
The intelligence behind life.
Yeah, and that allows our bodies to heal. It's the source of all creation, including our capacity for thought. When we're aligned with this underlying intelligence, we tend to experience feelings of wholeness, inspiration, well-being.
Got it. And what about universal consciousness? How does that fit in?
Universal consciousness is the awareness that we exist and that we are aware of our thoughts and experiences. It's the very faculty that allows us to perceive and experience life.
So the awareness itself.
Exactly. Without consciousness, nothing would register. Our senses would have no framework to make sense of the world. It's what brings our internal and external worlds to life for us.
Okay. And finally, universal thought. What role does that play?
Universal thought is the raw material, the foundational energy emanating from universal mind, which we utilize to construct our individual realities through consciousness.
The building blocks.
It's our inherent ability to think and to create form in our minds. Without thought, there would be nothing for us to be conscious of. It's the building block of our experience.
Yeah. The book uses an analogy involving a DVD, a TV, and electricity to illustrate how these three principles interrelate, right? Can you remind us of that?
Exactly. Universal thought is like the information encoded on the DVD.
Okay.
Universal consciousness is akin to the DVD player and the television screen, the mechanism that brings that information to life and makes it visible.
Makes sense.
And universal mind is like the electricity powering the entire system, the fundamental energy that makes the whole process possible.
Right.
The key insight here is that when we're in tune with universal mind, we tend to experience positive feelings. However, when we get overly identified with our individual thinking, what's often called the ego, we can feel disconnected from this underlying intelligence, leading to feelings of separation and negativity.
So if this constant mental chatter and our engagement with thinking are what block our natural state of well-being, the big question for someone like our listener, and frankly for all of us, is how do we actually stop thinking?
Yeah, the million-dollar question.
I mean, just telling someone to stop thinking can feel incredibly frustrating and, well, unhelpful.
Right. The book acknowledges that completely stopping the flow of thoughts isn't really the goal, nor is it likely even possible.
Okay, that's a relief.
What we can aim for is to become more aware of our thinking as thinking.
I'm just saying it.
Yes, and to reduce the amount of time we spend actively engaging with those fleeting thoughts that arise. It's about shifting our relationship to thought, not trying to suppress it entirely.
So it's more about creating a little distance between ourselves and our thoughts rather than trying to control or eliminate them.
Precisely. The key is developing an awareness of when we are engaged in that active thinking process. This awareness itself creates a natural detachment.
Allowing the thinking to subside and pass more easily. The book suggests this awareness requires very little effort. It's more about a state of present moment attention.
The analogy of the bowl of cloudy water is so effective here.
Really is.
If you try to stir it or filter it, you just make it more murky.
Yeah.
But if you just let it sit undisturbed,
The sediment naturally settles.
the sediment naturally settles and the water becomes clear. It's a powerful image for what happens when we stop trying so hard to control our thoughts.
That's exactly how our minds tend to work. When we're feeling agitated or unclear, it's often because our thinking is stirred up. Simply becoming aware of this allows the mental dirt to settle naturally,
Leading to clarity.
leading to a clearer and more peaceful state of mind. The book also uses the metaphor of quicksand.
Right. The struggle makes it worse.
The more we struggle against our thoughts, the more stuck we become. The way out is to relax, to let go, and to trust our innate wisdom to resurface. And it's reassuring to remember that it's perfectly normal for our minds to fluctuate between periods of more and less thinking. It's just part of being human.
Absolutely.
The comforting message is that our natural state of peace and fulfillment is always present underneath the surface noise of our thoughts.
Like the sun behind the clouds.
Exactly, like the sun always shining behind the clouds. Remembering this can help us gently return to that natural state when we realize we've gotten caught up in our thinking.
It is. It's simply recognizing the thinking for what it is and having faith that the underlying piece will reemerge. That's a powerful shift in perspective.
Now, a really practical concern that many, including our listener, might have is, how can we possibly function effectively in the world without constant thinking?
Yeah, that's a big one.
We have to make decisions, solve problems, plan for the future.
It feels like active thinking is absolutely essential for navigating daily life and achieving our goals.
That's a completely valid and important point. The book addresses this by asking us to reflect on those times when we're performing at our best.
Like in the zone. Exactly. When we're completely absorbed in what we're doing, that state of flow. When you're truly in the zone, what kind of deliberate, analytical thinking is actually happening?
Usually, not a whole lot. You're just immersed in the activity, reacting instinctively, almost like you're on autopilot in the best possible way.
Right.
It's when you start overthinking that things often fall apart.
Exactly. High-performing athletes frequently describe being in the zone, a state characterized by a noticeable absence of conscious analytical thought.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese concept of mushin beautifully captures this, a mind unburdened by random thoughts, anger, fear, or ego.
Mind without mind.
Allowing for spontaneous action and reaction based on ingrained training and intuition
Right.
rather than conscious deliberation. In many ways, excessive thinking can actually hinder performance.
By introducing hesitation and doubt.
Exactly. While a quieter mind allows us to tap into our full potential.
So peak performance isn't about engaging in more thinking. It's often about getting out of our heads and allowing our natural abilities to take over.
Seems counterintuitive, but yeah.
It is a bit counterintuitive, but it really resonates with my own experiences. Okay, but what about our aspirations, our goals, our big dreams? If we start to quiet our minds and think less, is there a risk of losing our drive or becoming passive? That's a concern I could see some listeners having.
That was a concern the author himself grappled with. The book makes a helpful distinction between two different sources of our goals, inspiration and desperation.
Inspiration versus desperation. Okay.
Goals that stem from desperation often carry a heavy feeling, driven by a sense of lack, scarcity, or a feeling that we have to achieve something to be okay.
The shoulds.
Yeah, the shoulds. These are often means goals, seen as a stepping stone to some future happiness, and even when we reach them, they can leave us feeling surprisingly empty.
Yeah, I recognize that pattern, always chasing the next thing, feeling like you need more to finally be satisfied.
In contrast, goals that arise from inspiration feel expansive and energizing, like a natural calling. Yes, lighter. They originate from a place of inner abundance and are often end goals in themselves, bringing feelings of joy, love, and peace in the very act of pursuing them.
Ah.
The book emphasizes that the underlying motivation behind our goals is far more significant than the goals themselves.
So when we quiet the mental noise, we don't necessarily lose our drive. Instead, we become more attuned to those goals that are truly aligned with our deeper values and aspirations.
The ones fueled by genuine inspiration.
Wow.
That's the core idea. When we're not caught in the grip of anxious or striving thoughts, we become more receptive to those intuitive nudges, those inspired ideas that come from a deeper, more authentic place within us.
Mm-hmm.
The book even offers a practical and a quite thought-provoking question to help us tap into these inspired goals.
What's that?
If I had unlimited resources, had already experienced all the material success I could imagine, felt no fear of failure or judgment, and wouldn't receive any external recognition for what I do, what would I genuinely choose to do or create?
Wow, that's an incredibly insightful question. It really cuts through a lot of the external pressures and societal expectations, doesn't it?
It really does. It gets to the core.
Now, the book also delves into the concepts of unconditional love and creation, linking them back to this state of a quieter mind. Can you elaborate on that connection?
Yes. The author shares a personal experience about his relationship with his girlfriend and how her unconditional love that wasn't based on specific reasons or conditions,
Just was.
just was provided him with a profound insight. He connects this idea of unconditional love to the infinite source we all originate from, a source of pure, inherent love that our constant thinking often obscures and prevents us from fully experiencing.
And what about unconditional creation? How does that differ?
Unconditional creation, as described in the book, is the act of creating purely from a place of love and intrinsic motivation.
For its own sake.
Exactly. Without being driven by external pressures or the need for specific outcomes like financial reward or fame, it's creating simply for the joy of the process itself. This kind of creation, the book argues, is often the birthplace of true innovation and brings with it an immediate sense of fulfillment and positive feeling. And crucially, it requires that state of a quieter mind,
Letting go of the ego.
a letting go of the ego's demands and expectations. Yes.
It's like when you're truly in flow with a creative project, you're not constantly thinking about the end result or how it will be received. You're just completely absorbed in the present moment of creation itself.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
perfectly. Now, a natural follow-up question for someone starting to experience this greater peace and joy through less thinking might be, what happens when old worries or anxieties start to resurface?
Yeah, is that a sign that something's gone wrong?
The book does address this possibility. It points out that feeling genuinely peaceful and worry-free might actually feel unfamiliar at first,
Strange, even.
and could even trigger thoughts that something is amiss. It's almost like the brain, accustomed to a certain level of worry, tries to revert to those familiar thinking patterns.
The old grooves.
It's important to recognize these returning thoughts as just that, more thinking. The book reassures us that we are actually at our most productive and effective in a state of reduced thinking.
Right. That energy is freed up.
The mental energy we previously spent on constant worry becomes available and can be channeled into those inspired goals we discussed earlier. Establishing a consistent activation ritual, perhaps a morning routine that helps cultivate that quieter mental space, can also be incredibly helpful in navigating these moments.
So it's about acknowledging those old patterns when they arise, not getting discouraged by them, and gently guiding ourselves back to that calmer mental space.
Exactly. Gently does it.
Now, one of the chapters that really stood out to me was titled, "Nothing is either good or bad." That seems to really challenge our ingrained way of judging the world around us.
It does. It's a big one. The book uses the simple analogy of a piano with its 88 keys.
Okay.
No single key is inherently wrong or bad. It only sounds discordant within the context of a particular musical phrase or sequence.
Right, depends on the context.
Similarly, life events themselves are essentially neutral until our thinking assigns a good or bad label to them based on our individual perspectives and interpretations.
So when we get caught up in judging things, like, say, different political viewpoints or whatever, that's when we create those negative emotions within ourselves. The event itself is neutral. It's our evaluation of it that carries the emotional charge.
Precisely. The book encourages us to shift our focus from getting caught up in these right-wrong dichotomies and to instead seek a deeper understanding, a more universal truth.
And that truth is found within.
And ultimately, it suggests that this true universal truth is something we discover within ourselves, not something imposed from the outside. Negative emotions then serve as a signal,
A little alarm bell.
indicating that we've momentarily forgotten that our thinking is the source of our feelings. Awareness of this allows the thinking to pass, leading us back to a state of peace.
This all ties into that question of how we make decisions and navigate life without constantly analyzing and overthinking everything. It feels like we've been conditioned to rely so heavily on that rational, logical part of our brain.
Definitely. The book builds on this idea that events are inherently neutral by suggesting that there's also no inherently right or wrong decision in many situations.
Really?
It encourages us to become more comfortable with relying on a state of reduced thinking when making choices, to tap into our intuition,
That gut feeling.
the gut feeling, or inner wisdom that often already knows what to do,
Right.
even if it doesn't always align with purely logical reasoning.
It's like that feeling of regret when you've ignored your initial gut feeling and listened to someone else's advice, even though deep down you knew what you wanted.
Precisely. The book describes our intuition as an inner GPS, constantly guiding us.
Inner GPS, I like that.
It cautions against the tendency to seek external validation for these intuitive nudges, as societal norms often don't readily confirm them until, maybe later they become more widely accepted.
Right.
Trusting that inner wisdom can often lead to unexpected and even seemingly miraculous outcomes.
So often the answers and the right path forward are already within us, but fear or self-doubt fueled by our thinking holds us back.
That's often the case.
Learning to trust that inner wisdom is key to accessing those answers. How do we actually cultivate and follow our intuition in a practical way?
Well, following our intuition is closely linked to that state of non-thinking, that direct connection to what the book refers to as infinite intelligence,
Yeah, okay.
the underlying source of all creation. Active analytical thinking tends to disrupt this connection.
It gets in the way.
Yeah. The state of non-thinking where intuition arises most clearly is inherently grounded in the present moment. Following your intuition, therefore, means cultivating a trust in your inner knowing,
Even when it seems illogical.
even when it doesn't seem logical or rational. Yes.
It's about paying attention to those subtle feelings, that quiet knowingness that might even contradict our logical mind. The book provides relatable examples, like feeling compelled to spontaneously talk to a stranger who ends up playing a significant role in your life.
Or that random urge to call a friend.
Or having a strong urge to call a particular friend who desperately needed to hear from you at that exact moment.
Exactly. Fear of the unknown is often a major obstacle that prevents people from following their intuition.
Understandable.
But stepping into that unknown, that space beyond our habitual thinking, is often where truly limitless possibilities reside.
This leads into the intriguing concept of creating space for miracles. What does that actually mean in this context?
This chapter opens with the classic Zen story, the one about the master and the scholar whose cup is already overflowing.
Ah, empty your cup.
Right. The central point is that if our minds are already crowded with our own preconceived notions and rigid beliefs, there's simply no room for new insights or perspectives to enter.
Need some space.
Space, or even a sense of mental nothingness, is essential for true creativity and understanding.
So, by quieting our active thinking, we're essentially creating that mental space for fresh thoughts, innovative ideas, and intuitive guidance to emerge.
Precisely. The book highlights examples of highly creative individuals like Thomas Edison and Albert Einstein, who intentionally cultivated unconventional methods to create mental space for breakthroughs. Edison famously would take naps holding steel balls.
So they'd wake him up when he dropped them?
Exactly. And Einstein would often play the violin.
Yeah.
These weren't about forceful effort, but about creating moments of mental stillness to allow insights to arise naturally.
Interesting.
The book outlines a three-step process for cultivating this receptivity to intuitive guidance, or divine downloads, as it calls them.
Okay, what are they?
First, recognizing that our thinking often causes negative emotions. Second, consciously surrendering that manual, effortful thinking and placing trust in our inner wisdom.
Trust.
And third, actively focusing on and amplifying feelings of love, peace, and joy.
It sounds like it's about getting out of our own way and allowing that inherent intelligence to guide us.
That's a good summary.
Now, what are some of the potential challenges or obstacles someone might encounter when they begin to live more in the state of reduced thinking? It's probably not always a smooth transition, right?
No, definitely not always smooth. The book astutely points out that feeling consistently peaceful and worry-free might actually feel unfamiliar.
weirdly uncomfortable.
and could even trigger thoughts that something is wrong. It's almost as if the brain, being a creature of habit, tries to pull us back into those more familiar patterns of worry and rumination.
Okay, so recognize that.
It's crucial to recognize this as just more thinking and to consciously choose not to engage with those doubts. It's also important to remember that we're often at our most productive and effective in a state of non-thinking.
Right.
The energy we once devoted to worry is now freed up for more fulfilling pursuits. Cultivating faith in the unknown and practicing self-compassion when we inevitably slip back into old thinking patterns
Be kind to yourself.
are key aspects of this ongoing process. Awareness is the crucial element that allows us to gently redirect ourselves back to that more peaceful state.
So it's about recognizing those old patterns without judgment, understanding that it's a normal part of the process, and gently steering ourselves back towards that quieter mental space.
Yeah, that's the key word.
Now, the final chapter, aptly titled, Now What?, really brings everything together. What's the key message there?
The final chapter emphasizes that this understanding isn't an endpoint, but rather the beginning of a new and more fulfilling way of experiencing life.
A new chapter.
Exactly. The core message is powerfully simple. We are always just one thought away from experiencing peace, love, and joy through the power of non-thinking.
One thought away.
Once we've gained these insights into the nature of thought and consciousness, we can't truly unsee them, which naturally leads to lasting positive change.
It also addresses that common feeling of, it can't be this simple, right?
Yeah.
Reminding us that often the deepest truths are indeed simple and are experienced intuitively rather than being purely intellectual concepts.
Exactly. It encourages us to continue to listen to that inner wisdom and to trust that everything we truly need is already present within us.
It's a message of ongoing encouragement, then, to continue the practice of letting go of unnecessary thinking and trusting in that inner shift,
which will organically influence how we navigate the world and how others perceive us.
Yeah. So, to summarize our deep dive into Joseph Nguyen's Don't Believe Everything You Think, the central takeaway really is that gaining a deeper understanding of our own thinking process
and consciously reducing our engagement with constant mental chatter
can lead to significant and positive transformations in our lives. It can unlock a greater sense of peace, joy, and a more direct connection to our own innate wisdom and intuition.
And for you, our listener who reached out about feeling overwhelmed by your thoughts, we sincerely hope this exploration has offered some valuable insights and perhaps a few of those aha moments that shed new light on your own experience.
Definitely. Consider this. What new possibilities might emerge for you if you began to trust your intuition more deeply and spent less time entangled in the endless cycle of your thoughts?
What untapped potential might be revealed if you simply allowed that mental space to just be?
Good question.
If any of the ideas we've discussed today have resonated with you, we highly recommend revisiting Joseph Nguyen's book or maybe exploring other resources related to the three principles.
It's definitely a journey.
It's truly a journey of ongoing discovery and deepening understanding.
Well, here's to finding a little more stillness amidst the mental whirlwind, perhaps uncovering that inherent peace, joy, and love that has been within you all along. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.